The conference room on the 42nd floor of the Hartwell Tower smelled like leather and old money, and the particular brand of contempt that only comes from people who have never once doubted their own importance. Leonora Voss sat at the far end of the long table, alone on her side, with nothing in front of her but a glass of water and a legal pad she hadn't written on. Across from her sat her ex-husband, Callum Hartwell, flanked by two senior partners from the firm of Ogilvy, Briggs & Associates, the most expensive corporate law firm in Toronto. Callum's mother, Yvette, occupied the chair at the head of the table, with the posture of a woman who had spent 70 years being told she was the most important person in every room she entered. She believed it completely. Callum leaned over to one of his lawyers and said something low, and both men smiled. His mother didn't bother to lower her voice at all. "She actually came alone," Yvette said, "not quite to anyone. I told you she would. She doesn't have the resources for proper counsel. It's almost embarrassing, isn't it?" It wasn't a question. Leonora didn't look up. She turned the legal pad 90 degrees, aligned it perfectly with the edge of the table, and took a slow sip of water. She was 31 years old. She was wearing a blazer she had bought second-hand from a consignment store in Kensington Market, paired with a white shirt she had ironed that morning. In a studio apartment that Callum's lawyers had argued, successfully, she had no right to keep. She looked, to everyone in that room, like exactly what they believed her to be. A woman running out of options. A woman about to lose. The mediation was supposed to take 2 hours. Callum wanted the full payout from the Hartwell Group's IPO, which was going public in 11 days. He wanted to establish, in writing, that Leonora had contributed nothing of material value to the company during their 3 years of marriage, and therefore had no standing to claim any portion of the pre-IPO shares that had been registered in the company's name during that period. His lawyers had prepared a 40-page brief. They had spreadsheets. They had a forensic accountant waiting in the lobby. What they did not have was any idea who they were sitting across from. Leonora had met Callum at a conference in Montreal. He had been charming in the specific way that men with inherited money and moderate intelligence tend to be charming. Confident, funny, accustomed to being liked. She had been there as a quiet observer, representing a private advisory group she never named at networking events. She had a habit of anonymity. She had reasons for it. Callum had thought her mysterious. He had fallen in love, or what passed for it in him, quickly. She had let herself believe it might be real. They were married within a year. She moved into the Hartwell family's world, which meant moving into their orbit of galas and board dinners, and the slow, suffocating expectation that she would make herself smaller. Yvette had been clear from the first Sunday brunch. "Callum needs a partner who understands discretion," she had said, cutting her poached egg with surgical precision. "Not someone who thinks her opinions belong in the boardroom." Leonora had smiled and said nothing. She was very good at saying nothing. What Callum had never thought to ask, in 3 years of marriage, was what Leonora had done before she met him. He knew she had worked in finance. He knew she was sharp, which was the word he used when he meant she intimidated him slightly. He had never asked for specifics. Yvette had told him not to bother. That kind of woman always exaggerates. And Callum, as he did with most things his mother said, had agreed. He did not know that Leonora, born Leonora Voss and registered in 3 countries under variations of that name, had spent the 7 years before their marriage building a private investment architecture called Meridian Capital Group. Meridian was not a public firm. It did not advertise. It had no website. It managed a portfolio worth, at last calculation, just over $4 billion. It had been built by Leonora and 2 partners, quietly, from a basement office in Edinburgh, from a coffee shop in Singapore, from a rented desk in a co-working space in Waterloo, Ontario, where no one knew her name and she preferred it that way. She had not told Callum about Meridian because she had been careful, and then because she had been hurt, and finally, because she had decided to wait until it mattered. Now it mattered. The mediator, a careful woman named Dr. Fairweather who specialized in high-net-worth separations, opened the session with the standard language about good faith and mutual resolution. Callum's senior lawyer, a man named Bryce, began speaking before she had finished. He was the kind of lawyer who assumed that speaking quickly was the same as speaking effectively. "My client's position is straightforward," Bryce said, dealing folders around the table like a blackjack dealer. "Ms. Voss brought no financial assets into this marriage, contributed no intellectual property to Hartwell Group, and signed a prenuptial agreement which clearly limits her claim to the marital residence, which has already been valued and settled. We are here today solely to formalize that the IPO shares are not subject to any claim." The prenuptial agreement, Callum added, because he couldn't help himself, was very fair. "My lawyers made sure of that." Yvette made a small sound of agreement, which she clearly thought passed for subtlety. Leonora placed both hands flat on the table. May I speak? Bryce glanced at her with the tolerant expression of a man who has already won. Of course. I'd like to note for the record, Leonora said, that the prenuptial agreement does not cover assets in which Hartwell Group holds a minority position through a third-party holding entity. Specifically, it does not cover the structured equity arrangement between Hartwell Group and Meridian Capital Group, entered into 14 months ago, in which Meridian provided a $40 million convertible credit facility to fund the product development phase of Hartwell's SaaS platform. The room did not go quiet. It stopped. Bryce looked up from his folder. Callum's expression shifted in a way that was almost imperceptible. A slight tightening around the eyes, a flicker of something that was not quite recognition and not quite fear, but lived in the space between. Meridian Capital Group, Leonora continued, is currently the largest single non-family creditor of Hartwell Group. Upon IPO, that convertible note converts to equity at a predetermined price, a price that was set, in writing, by your own financial team, Mr. Hartwell, who I believe described the terms as extraordinarily favorable to Hartwell Group. They were favorable to Hartwell Group. She paused. They were also structured to give Meridian a 15% equity stake at conversion, which happens in 11 days. Bryce opened his mouth, closed it and opened it again. Meridian Capital Group is, that firm is a. He turned to his colleague, then back. Who is the principal of Meridian Capital Group? Leonora looked at him the way a person looks at a question they have been waiting a long time to answer. I am, she said. The sound Yvette made was not a word. It was a very small, very undignified noise, like air leaving a tire slowly. Callum stood up. His chair rolled back and hit the credenza behind him with a thud that startled everyone. That's impossible, he said. His voice came out higher than he intended. You can't. How would you even? Meridian contacted us through an intermediary. There was never a name. There is always a name, Leonora said. You simply didn't look for it. This is a manipulation, Yvette said, her composure reassembling itself with the speed of long practice. This is a fabrication designed to extort a settlement from my son. You came into this family with nothing, Leonora. I made sure to know that about you. Leonora turned to look at Yvette, and it was a long look, patient and absolutely without heat, the kind of look that is more unsettling than anger. You made sure to know what I showed you, she said. That's a different thing. She reached into her bag the battered canvas tote that Callum had once called an eyesore, and placed a single document on the table. It was a corporate registry printout from the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario. Meridian Capital Group, Principal. Leonora E. Voss. Registration date, 7 years ago. My lawyers, Leonora said, will be filing the conversion notice with the TSX at 9 a.m. on the day of the IPO. At that point, I will own 15% of the publicly traded shares of Hartwell Group. The prenuptial agreement, which I did sign, covers personal assets accumulated during the marriage. It does not cover the conversion of a pre-existing corporate credit instrument. She slid a second document across the table. This is the legal opinion from Davies, Ward, Phillips and Weinberg. They agree with me. There was a reason she had chosen Davies Ward. It was the oldest, most respected corporate law firm in the country. Ogilvy, Briggs was expensive, Davies Ward was institutional. Bryce knew this, the look on his face confirmed it. Callum's second lawyer, who had not yet spoken, leaned over and said something in Bryce's ear. Bryce did not look reassured. Callum, Yvette said, her voice tight as piano wire. Call Arthur. Arthur Briggs is in this room, mother, Callum said, and his voice had a ragged quality to it that Leonora had only heard once before. On the night she had told him she was leaving, he had not taken it well. He had said things she had written down. I don't want your equity, Leonora said. The room looked at her. I want to be clear about that. I didn't structure this to take 15% of your company. I structured it because it was a legitimate investment, because the product was sound, and because I believed in it more than your own venture capital partners did, which is why you came to Meridian in the first place. She stood up. She was not tall, but she stood in a way that used the full space she occupied. What I want, she said, is for this room to understand that the settlement you proposed, the one that offered me $60,000 and a storage unit's worth of furniture, was not offered in good faith. You knew, or you should have known, that Meridian's conversion would complicate this proceeding significantly. Someone in your financial team knew. I'm giving you the opportunity right now to arrive at an arrangement that reflects the actual situation. Bryce looked at his folder, then at Callum, then at the document from Davies Ward. We'll need to recess. Take the time you need, Leonora said. She picked up her canvas bag and her untouched legal pad and walked out of the room. The hallway outside was long and carpeted and very quiet. There was a window at the far end that looked out over the lake. It was February, and the water was gray and frozen at the edges, and the sky was the particular shade of white that means more snow is coming. Leonora stood at the window and looked at it for a while. Her phone buzzed. A message from her partner at Meridian, a man named Tobias who had been with her since Edinburgh and who communicated primarily in complete sentences and mild understatement. Conversion paperwork ready, legal on standby. Also the Globe and Mail called again, still saying no? She typed back, still saying no. Not yet. She was not interested in being a story. She was interested in being left alone to work. The problem was that Callum had made that impossible, and his mother had made it worse. And the $60,000 settlement offer had made it a matter of principle. Leonora had grown up in Hamilton, the second daughter of a woman who cleaned other people's houses, and a father who had left when she was 9. She had been scholarship smart and circumstantially poor, and she had learned very early that the world sorted people into those who were seen and those who were not, and that being not seen was actually useful if you were paying attention. She had paid attention. She had gone to Waterloo on a full scholarship, studied computational finance, and spent 2 years at a hedge fund in London, where she discovered she was better at reading risk than anyone she worked with, and also that no one was particularly interested in hearing that from a 23-year-old woman who didn't have the right last name. So she had gone and built her own last name. Meridian was not a revenge project, it was just work, but the work had a particular quality of focus that came from knowing exactly what it felt like to be dismissed. She had learned to use that. The anger didn't burn in her. It sat still and cold and very useful, like a compass pointing consistently north. She had given Callum 3 years, and then she had given him an honest conversation about what wasn't working. And he had responded by calling his mother. And his mother had called her lawyers, and the lawyers had produced a prenuptial agreement that was designed to leave her with nothing. And Callum had signed it without reading the addendum his own firm had attached to the Meridian deal. Because Callum trusted his team to handle details. It was the same mistake he had made with her from the beginning. She was still looking at the lake when she heard the door open behind her. It was not Callum. It was Yvette. Leonora did not turn around. Yvette came to stand a few feet away. She was a handsome woman, 71, with good bones and the posture of someone who had been told to stand straight since childhood. She was wearing a suit that had been made for her. She looked at the lake. "I underestimated you," she said. She said it the way people say things they find distasteful but necessary. "You decided what I was," Leonora said, "before you had any information." "Yes." Yvette's jaw moved slightly. "That appears to have been an error." "It was," Leonora agreed. A long silence. "What do you want?" Yvette said, not aggressively, genuinely. "I already said, a revised settlement, a fair one." Yvette was quiet. Then, "Callum did care about you. I want you to know that. Whatever he became at the beginning, he did." Leonora finally turned to look at her. "I know," she said. "That part was real. It wasn't enough, but it was real." She looked back at the window. "That's not what this is about. This is about what your lawyers tried to do, and what that offer said about how I was valued. I'm correcting it." Yvette nodded once, a small and careful motion. Then she went back inside. The revised settlement took 4 hours and 3 additional lawyers to produce. It was not about the equity, Leonora had been clear about that. Meridian would proceed with the conversion on its own terms, as a separate matter entirely. What the settlement covered was what should have been covered in the first place. Her contribution to the household, to Callum's stability, to the years of dinners and connections and travel and quiet invisible support that his team had called negligible, and his mother had called nothing. The number they arrived at was not extravagant. It was honest. That was all she had asked for. She signed the document at 6:17 in the evening. Bryce countersigned with the expression of a man reassessing several of his assumptions. Callum signed without looking at her. Yvette, leaving, paused at the door. She looked back at Leonora with an expression that was not warm but was, Leonora thought, the closest thing to respect the woman was capable of producing on short notice. "The investment in our product," Yvette said. "Meridian. You believed it was good?" "I did," Leonora said. "It is good. That's why I funded it." Yvette considered that. Then she left. The IPO happened on a Thursday. Meridian's conversion went through at 9:04 a.m., 11 seconds after the TSX opening bell. The Hartwell Group stock had a strong first day. By market close, Meridian's 15% position was worth, on paper, considerably more than the $40 million that had gone in. Tobias sent a single-line message. "Edinburgh to here. Not bad." Leonora read it in the back of a rideshare heading to her new apartment. A real one this time. On the top floor of a building in the Junction. She had not moved into anything flashy. She did not own things for the appearance of them. The apartment had good light and a kitchen she planned to actually use and a spare room she was turning into an office. The Globe and Mail ran a piece 3 days later. Someone at the TSX had talked. The headline read, "Mystery Investors IPO Stake Tied to Hartwell Divorce." The article was careful and reasonably accurate. It did not have her photograph because she had declined to provide one, and it used the phrase "fiercely private" twice, which she thought was fair. Her phone buzzed for 2 days straight. She answered the ones from people she trusted and let the rest go to voicemail. Callum called once. She let it ring. He didn't leave a message. What she did not expect was the letter. It arrived 6 weeks after the IPO, handwritten on cream stationery, in the particular upright script of someone who had been taught penmanship as a moral virtue. It was from Yvette. It was not an apology. Leonora would have been suspicious of an apology. It was something more specific, an acknowledgement. Yvette wrote that she had looked into Meridian's history, that she had read the case studies, that she had been wrong in her assessment, and that she was, in her word, correcting that. She noted, with what seemed like genuine curiosity, that the investment in Hartwell's product had happened 18 months before the separation. Before any of this had begun to deteriorate. "You invested in the company," Yvette wrote, "while you were still trying to make the marriage work. That tells me something about the kind of person you are. I am sorry it did not tell me sooner." Leonora read it twice, folded it and put it in a drawer. Not to keep as a trophy, just because it was true and true things deserve to be kept. The spare room became the office. Tobias flew in from London for a week, and they sat at her kitchen table and mapped the next 3 years. There were 2 funds to restructure, a new geography to enter, and a conversation she had been putting off about bringing in a third partner who had been quietly asking for 2 years. They ordered Vietnamese food and argued about interest rate projections, and at some point past midnight Tobias said, without looking up from his laptop, "You seem different." "Different how?" Leonora said. "Lighter," he said. She thought about that. The marble counter of that conference room, the carpet of the hallway, the lake, gray and frozen and very still, the long years of being known only as much as she chose to show, and the particular exhaustion of always choosing carefully. She thought about Yvette's letter, and what it said about the cost of snap judgments, and what it said about what could shift, even late, when someone was willing to look again. "I think I got tired of carrying it," she said. "The anger, the proof," she said, "that I was worth something. I was always carrying the proof around in case someone asked. I don't think I need to do that anymore." Tobias looked up and nodded once in the way that meant he understood and did not need to say more. He went back to his spreadsheet. She went back to hers. Outside the window, Toronto was cold and lit up and entirely indifferent, the way cities are, and she found that she didn't mind. She had never needed the city to notice her. She just needed the work, and the work was good, and the morning was coming, and there was a great deal still to build.